What's up, y'all, and welcome back to the Michael Experience Podcast. I am your orator and originator, Michael, and these are my thoughts, my life, my way. So, as we're on this self journey, right? We love a good self journey. We love a good persevering, overcoming, redefining journey and story. And so I thought it only fitting to share some of my own because I feel like it can help somebody else feel seen and connected and, informed in some way. So I was just in my house, in my green room, my calm room. I call it my green room because my plants in here, or the majority of my plants are in here. And it's my place to center and feel connected. It's got the best sun in the house. And so I just feel like this room is so bright. But as I'm sitting here and I'm under the heater, I got the heater on my feet, I just had this thought about goal setting and how at this stage of my life, goal setting has become very, very tedious, and kind of hard to do in a lot of aspects. And the reason why is because throughout my life, I didn't necessarily know where I would go or where I would land, but I always knew that I just needed to do more. And I don't know if you feel that way or have felt that way or are currently feeling that way. But it's like when you have that drive that's like, I gotta do something, I have to do more, I gotta achieve more. It keeps you constantly in motion, whether you have that defined goal or you have that loose set of goals based on a bigger thing, like I got to make this amount of money and that be your guiding light, or whether it's I got to do these steps, whatever your guiding light and your north star is for your goal setting. um at this point for me, it feels like a very foreign concept because I never thought that I would be where I am in life. I never thought I would get to six figures, nor did I think I would beyond or get beyond six figures in a salary. In the beginning, I didn't know that I would, buy my home, and drive the car and have the clothes and the things. And so when I look at life now, having achieved all of these things that I really didn't think were possible, but I was like, I'm gonna prove to myself I can do something. I've gotten to this place now in life where I'm like, oh crap, like what are my goals and like what is my direction? And it's so interesting. I found myself the other day thinking like life was simpler growing up, even though there were some hardships and there were some things that I did not enjoy about growing up. I'm like, God, like the scope of, life and what had to be done and kind of those um daily things that you have to do. I can't even get the right word I'm thinking of, but those expectations of being an adult, you really, really don't understand that when you are a kid. And I kind of was looking back like, God, now I'm having real big adult mature decisions to make. And my God, what it would be to just go back to a time where I just wanted to get home after school and, not listen to the teachers talk, or I wanted to have that time of year where we didn't have much homework. Like, what would that be? Because as an adult, I feel like we are just constantly just moving mentally and physically, some of us. And so when I think about my goals now, it's so hard because I'm like, yeah, I do want to continue to be successful. I want to continue to have my lifestyle. But what does it look like when you've defied all of the odds that were against you? And what does that look like when those loose goals that you have for yourself have already been exceeded? And I operate under the notion that I don't want to take more than what I need. I always want to give more than I take. Um, but also in just figuring out as those needs change and grow, like how does my view on a goal attainment and goal reaching and goal setting, like how does that work? And so I've spent the last few months just really trying to do some soul work and some soul searching. And I'm like, okay, where is your core, Michael? Like, where's your core? If you, and I asked myself the question, if you were rich and money was not an issue, what is it that you would be doing? And I asked myself that question over and over and over again because that to me would present the perfect situation where I'm not thinking about, the amount of money that I pay in rent or mortgage now. My car note being expensive, my utilities being expensive, you know, my need to express myself through fashion, which to me is an art form. And so I think about all of those things constantly and what it would take to continue to maintain that or expand in some ways. It's your livelihood, I guess, is what I'm saying. But I think it can be very convoluted when you come from a method of survival mode. And even though you've achieved and even though you've attained, that survival mode is always going to be one of those foundational blocks that shows up that will have you second guessing and that will have you thinking about the worst. And although your intention is to mitigate and to never go back to that worst situation, I think there's always just this real fear in the back of your mind that's like, I've already been there and I don't want to go back there, so I'm going to do whatever it takes. And that is the thing, even though it seems like a small thing, I think it has a very large impact in how I plan my day and move throughout my days and setting goals and all of that. So, is that a good thing? I don't know. I don't know. So anyway, in reshaping that or kind of getting myself out of that questioning mode, I think about again, if I were rich and money was not an object, what is it that I would be doing? And I've asked myself that question in the last 6 months over and over and over again. And I keep coming back to this thing where I am, using my voice to motivate, inspire, advise, within the wheelhouse and within the industries and within the subject matters that I'm familiar with, is doing that. And so I've come back to that over and over again, and I'm like, okay, I know that my voice is probably the most powerful thing that I can give to others. Really, my mind, but through my voice is how it translates. That's what I can give to people. And so I'm asking myself, well, Michael, how can you do more of that? So how if you keep coming back to this answer, how can you do more of that? And in doing more of that, how can it positively affect and continue the livelihood that you're accustomed to? And that's the harder part because it requires me to think about avenues in which I haven't, had any experience directly, or just haven't been exposed to, at least from the back of house where you're kind of getting into the ground floor of it. And so I find myself like, okay, let me use the internet because I'm always challenging people to use the internet and resources that are at their disposal. That's the first thing I tell my daughter is like, did you get on Google before you called me? You know what I mean? Um, and so I kind of went down this kind of rabbit hole of like, okay, people who use their voices, what are they doing? And so one of the things I've set for myself as a goal is to do a TED talk. I'm like, okay, I could literally be on a TED talk, giving some sort of system or some sort of roadmap to what it's like to come from an underserved community and to defy educationally, experientially, all of the odds in career and success as it pertains to those things. But then also expounding on the shift mentally, I believe that it takes when you just don't have the interactions of the corporate space and you haven't been exposed to like-minded people, what that transition is like. And I think that lends itself to the conversation around imposter syndrome, which was very real for me as I would continue to climb in my journey. I remember being in rooms with people and saying, this level of conversation is something I have never been privy to and I've never had. And so, because I haven't done it, I haven't seen it in my family, I haven't seen it in my friend circles at this particular point, and I didn't see it as a possibility model. I think that's important too, because I think when you are in underserved communities and you don't have the visibility of success in corporate life and corporate dynamic around you, um, it does put you at a disadvantage because you go into things kind of like, wait, what is this? Where did this come from? How did I miss this? And so for me, I found myself in rooms and conversations were happening, and I was like, "Oh my God, I've I wish that my mom or my dad or my grandparents or I wish somebody would have told me that this was a possibility so that I could prepare myself." And so imposter syndrome began to set in because I was like, I don't know that I'm meant to be here. I don't know if I'm meant to be here. And I would be in rooms a lot of times just sweating profusely or fidgeting under the table, whether I was kicking my legs or fiddling with my fingers and things like that, second guessing the words that come out of my mouth, or even in some moments, I felt like I had an opinion or I had a thought on the subject matter, but I didn't say it because I didn't want to sound stupid. And it took me, I don't want to say it took me a while, but it took me enough time to realize in the room what was happening. It took me some time, but once I realized what was happening, one or two things was evident to me is that I was going to let this imposter syndrome, either I was going to let it keep me from becoming the person that I wanted to be, and I was going to allow it to push me further back um, in my regression because it's no progress in that. It's going to push me back into that non-experiential bucket of not having the models, not having the examples in front of you, or it was going to propel me to go even further into my journey of who I want to become and what I wanted that to look like and feel like. And so I voted, within to like, okay, we're gonna push this thing, and what we don't know, we're gonna figure out. And that was my guiding or north star. And so, yeah, I think one of the things I had to adopt very early was like, if I say something and it sounds crazy, it's a moment in time. I will look at it as a teachable moment and I will move forward. And so I removed that guardrail instantly of feeling like if I say something out of turn or if I didn't phrase it the right way, that I was going to feel stupid and then that was going to put me back because I'm never going to want to say anything in a room again. I was like, absolutely not. You know what? I believe that there are other people that have been in these, in these rooms and in these spaces much longer, and they don't have a problem with saying whatever, even the craziest ideas. So why am I limiting myself? We'll just all be in here figuring it out together. And so I adopted that mentality. But one of the other things I started doing too is looking at the what I would think were the strongest people in the room, or people that had a skill or quality that I wanted to add to my tool belt. And so one of the things that was very important to me was the language. Language was very important to me. I was like, okay, I'm a very smart person. I read the encyclopedia for fun. Dictionary reading was punishment for me growing up. However, in practice, having conversations and knowing how to assign proper context and proper placement and associations that are important, I said, okay, I have to pay attention to somebody that is great at taking concepts and building strategy based on it. somebody that is able to see things in more than one way, and that is able to kind of disseminate that. And so I had a mentor and leader who I felt just embodied it perfectly. And I would just find myself, looking for ways to be in the space when she was delivering the way she was. And so and I remember her asking me one day, she was like, Michael, like, what is it that you feel like you need from me? What is it that what is it that I can do to help you, in your growth? And I said, I need to be able to do what you do when you walk into those rooms. I was like, because the way that you communicate in there, I was like, you are able to pull and synthesize from a lot of different places. I said, I need to be able to do that. And I remember she laughed and she said, okay, well, that just means that you and I are going to have to spend more time together. And that was very powerful for me because it exposed me to different levels of leadership, which is what I needed. It exposed me to different levels of leadership from VP, of a region, VP of territories, and then CEO of the company. When the CEO of the company knows who you are, and I mean asks for you in your absence, you know that you have made some kind of impression and some kind of impact. And so I would be in these conversations and in these rooms. And at first, for me, it was just kind of one of those things where I just wanted to soak up as much as I could. But then it became a point where I was then being brought into conversations. And I think that was the part that I didn't anticipate. I thought I would, just kind of blend in and kind of be like a scribe of sorts and just take in the information and store it. However, this is about presence in a room. When you are in a room, people notice, right? And so people are like, well, you're here. What is it that you want to input? And I don't know what it is about my aura or what it is about my presence in a room that tells people that my wheels are spinning. But people typically will be like, Michael. And I'm like, oh, here we go. At the beginning, more so, but here we go. And so I will take those points and I will pull them together and I will ask questions to kind of help define and shape what the discussion is. And then I'm like, but what if we did this instead? And that looked like this. And so it's so great that when those conversations start happening, your mentor can look at you and be like, you got it. You got it. I'll never forget being in the room with, some of these giants and, my mentor looking at me and just having this look in her eyes of like, you really didn't even need me. Now, they always say that your leaders and your mentors can see the light in you, that can see the superpower in you before you can, especially the ones that delight in, what their gifts are and how they can contribute. So she probably knew in some form or fashion that I had this gift before, but it needed to be unlocked. And so when I started being requested to be a part of things that normally somebody in my position wouldn't be a part of, I think that's when the realization happened for me that, you know, you are much better at this than you give yourself credit for. And I think that's important when you're dealing with, your view of imposter syndrome and your feelings of imposter syndrome is that everything, and I had to learn this in hindsight, but everything that you have and everything that you've attained and come with to this position or this point in your life or whatever you have going on, whatever you have got you here and is the reason why the people around you wanted you in the space. And for whatever reason, that fear in us, I believe that survival mentality, the fear that comes with that, keeps pulling us back to like, yeah, but you might go back to being broke. You might go back to having to do this or do that. And it can be very daunting because fear can be very, very powerful if you allow it to be. But what I began to realize is that every foundational piece that I needed was there. It just needed to be nurtured and it needed to be leaned into. You know what I mean? Let your fear be fuel. And that was become one of my mantras. Is like, okay, if I find myself just slightly fearful of something, I'm not going to run away from it. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to lean into it and see why, I'm afraid of it. And it's so funny because in my career there have been times where I felt something in my chest, like a project or something or initiative would come up, and like my chest would be really beating around this, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't want to do it. I'm like, I refuse. And I always have to check myself, and I'm like, why are you, like, what is this about? Like, what is this in your chest? Is it because it's new and you haven't done it before? Is it because you think that it's out of your scope? Is it because people in the room, the people around you in the room have done it before and with success? What does that look like? And so I begin challenging those barriers, or those, those emotional walls that come up, so that I'm like, no, we got to get beyond that, because on the other side of it is the same success that I've achieved throughout my career. And the only way to get, over something is to go through something. You don't just get to circumvent it, because the issues are still there. And so that is what I started doing. And to go back to that first time, I think I was in I was invited into a talent um calibration, or a talent meeting. And this was for leaders that were at my level and maybe a level or so above. And I was specifically requested to come into this. And it was very it was made very apparent to me that this is something that does not happen. We don't typically allow a person in your position to come into this conversation, but because of your unique capabilities, you are being brought in, and this is something that is very, unusual. And so it was definitely told to me that, and I got it, and I got to go into this conversation, and I'm being asked, questions about leadership potential, and I'm being asked about leadership gaps as it pertains to, you know, a position, but also people that are in that position. And I'm like, okay, this feels great. But to be invited into those level of things and for people to put you out there, I mean, my name was out there, and in the talent space, I have been recognized in many capacities that I've worked in for my ability to come in, and create structure and systems, and be able to synthesize information based on whatever the environment is giving, or whatever, population of people, being able to come in, synthesize the information, and create a game plan, a working game plan based on it. And I have kept those moments very close to me throughout my career, no matter what company I've gone to. But that was one of the defining moments for me that said, you know what, there is something that you have that these people really need. And you came in the door with that, whether it was lying dormant, or whether it was, just a softer version of the skill, when you started. But yeah, that meeting, that first talent meeting, really did it for me, and it set the tone. And so throughout my career, I have to go back to that and the feelings that I felt in order to sometimes move past these newer roadblocks that I have. But imposter syndrome, my point is that imposter syndrome is something that I don't believe ever really goes away. I think the effects behind it get better. But I think if you've ever experienced imposter syndrome, it does pop back up later, and probably often in your journey. Now, whether that's visible to others or not, I mean, that's a very individual journey. And, how you navigate it, of course, is the same. But when it comes to achieving and pushing yourself, I don't feel like people talk enough about that transition from maybe having no goals, maybe having no achievements, maybe not being able to see a 5 year, 10-year progression, and projection, to getting to a place where you understand your value and you start pouring into that and maximizing that value and your potential. And then as you are achieving, right, you get to a place where you're like, I've achieved. I've achieved things that I didn't think that I could. And so what does this mean going forward? Because everything, and I do mean everything that I've done at this point in my life, I didn't see it early on. And I kind of let survival and proving a point to myself that I could do it be my guiding force instead of having just these really defined moments where I'm like, you know what? I want to have this at this time. I want to have that in that time. And I did that to some degrees with a few things, but taking one thing in my career or one thing in my life and having a lifelong plan for that, I didn't have it. And recently I was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I laughed. I laughed because I was like, I mean, lady, I am already, you know what I mean? I'm pushing 40 and you know, tell my knees and my ankles and sometimes my memory like that, I'm still growing up. But it really jarred me in a way because I have been thinking about goals for months and what would make me happy and how could I move into a new space if that's what I'm meant to do. And I keep coming back to all of these foundational moments to kind of remind myself, but also hoping that they give me some of that fuel and that spark that I had to just get back out there and get to grinding. But that journey seems to be easier said than done and harder than it looks because 6 months into having no ties essentially, right? I went on this journey of not working in corporate because in my near 40 years, I I haven't had a space of just being able to get up every day and do what I want to do and figure out what my day truly looks like just for me. Now, I've had roles where I was able to, plan my day and plan days for others. That's one thing. And to say, oh, I can kind of move about. But that comes with a level of attachment to, being responsive or being on call, if you will, in some of those roles. But never, before now did I have the time to just say, I'm going to wake up at 3 p.m. or I'm going to wake up at 4 p.m. And when I wake up at 4 p.m., I may have a plan or I may have no plan, and so part of my journey was like, let me take 3 months, 3 to 6 months max to figure out what that looks like. And I have to do that independent of being tied to a role or position, and also expectations of other people and family commitments and things like that. And so it's just opportune time. My daughter's grown, and you know, um, thank God I had enough money to sustain myself for an extended period of time and, to be able to still do the things that I wanted to do. But I didn't think it would take me so long to figure out what my next move is. And so when I go back to asking myself the question of, okay, if you could do anything that you want to do, money was not an object, what would that be? And I said before, like it would be utilizing my voice, which is really my mind, the transitional piece from my mind. Like, where would you go? What would you do with that? So, one of the things that was apparent to me, and I had to pray on this for a while, but one of the things that was very apparent to me was that there is a population of people that love to hear my voice, right? And some of that is just some people like the sound of my voice, which if you're like me out there, you probably are like, oh my God, I hate my own voice. But there are so many people out there that like the sound of my voice. That's one thing. But there are a large number of people who appreciate what my voice is being utilized for, the words, the information, the advisement, the encouragement, those things. And so there's real value in utilizing your voice in that way. And so I said to myself, I guess I could do a podcast. And at first I didn't think I would do it because I was like, how would I do it? Like, what does that look like? And having to tie that into like finances because my livelihood is very much a part of it. I'm like, how will I do a podcast and that be, financially, a savvy for me? Like, what would I do in that space? And so it just takes time looking into it and how do you want to do the podcast. One of the bigger things for me also was what does it look like? And so I bought equipment, and then my friend gifted me a really nice camera because he said that the camera that I had was trash and that I should send it back. Well, I couldn't. I could probably resell it, but he was like, take this camera, like go ahead on or whatever. Like this is my gift to you, to get your podcast started. And I was like, okay, awesome, great. But then I started thinking, do I really want to be face forward in front of people? And so this is how this process works. I had gotten so used to being front and center because all of my roles required me to be in front of people and to, the imagery, from the imagery to the cadence, and some of people may call it code switching. But all of these things that tie into your presence, I had gotten so used to that every day, or I think we call it in corporate spaces, we call it being on or being a star, being either way, being the star of the day or being the star of the show or being on. And I had gotten so used to being on that I'd never even questioned if I wanted to stay on and if I wanted to be a star in that way. And what I've come up with is I don't have to be the star. And honestly, if I were behind the scenes and being just as effective, that would probably work better for me. It probably would work better for me. And I remember voicing this to some peers, um, and friends and things like that. And everybody's like, "But Michael, you're so fashionable, and your energy, and people just love you, and all of that." And I remember telling one of my friends, I said, "Yes, but that doesn't have anything to do with me." And the interesting thing about saying that out loud, which I think it was the first time that I said that out loud. And it was in a group full of my friends, some that I had worked with in my professional life as well. But it was so interesting that everybody just kept reiterating that, Michael, I just remember when you did this, and I just remember, you being the person that got us together, and you did it in such a way, and it just seems like, that you would love that, and you don't mind being the center of attention. And I was like, here's the thing. I didn't do all of those things because it was a want necessarily. I did it because it was a necessity and somebody had to do it. And when I think about my role in relationships where I'm more dominant, I'm more active, I'm more vocal, more in charge, I don't ever walk out into the world and say, I want to be the one, I want to be the star, I want to be on in that way. I never walk into any of the spaces in life and think that. I prefer to walk into situations and just be a part of it and not be the center of it. However, my presence in a room, the way that I dress, the aura that I carry, the fluidity in my walk, I guess the affectation and the tonality in my voice when I do speak is something that people notice. And I've had to understand that that is how we get to this space where people believe that because you've done it, and that you're perceived as capable of showing up in a certain way, that is what becomes the expectation, or that's what of yourself, number one, but of other people. And that's the thing that I needed people to know about me, is that I don't walk into the room wanting to be that. I honestly want to be a part of it and not the center of it. And so after going around and around in this conversation, I believe at some point one of my friends got it and was like, I think I understand what he's saying. Because to other people, it looks like I am having these ideal moments, and I am in this ideal space. And there are a lot of people who crave the attention and crave and have to be in charge. And I'm just not that person. I want things to be done right. I have the ability to do the things, but I've only done it out of necessity, because typically in a space, other people can't do things the way that I do them. And so again, it was something that I had to say out loud for the first time. But in saying it out loud, I knew it internally, but to say it out loud meant something very important for me too, because it was realized in that moment. It was materialized in my mind, and I knew it for a long time. But to actually say the words, and not just say them to myself, say it to other people, it really made me think about how I've shown up in situations, and then how I would like to show up moving forward. And so that put me in a space of like, okay, Michael, so when you do your next thing, you don't have to be front and center. And so if you do a podcast, although you've been on Facebook Live doing LGT Thursdays and sipping Sundays and whatever else you've done in your career, or in your life, although you've created a new platform, on other social media avenues that were visual, you don't have to continue to do that. Like, you could very well be just as effective in a behind the scenes supportive way. And so for me, I said, if I'm going to do a podcast, what does that look like? And I said, there are people who do audio only. And so I am going to do an audio only podcast, and that is how I'm going to start. And I'm just going to start it, and I'm going to learn. I'm just going to learn what that looks like. Just like any career or any new thing in my life, I was like, I mean, there is a learning curve, even though I don't know in its entirety what using my voice, using my mind translated to my through my voice looks like. Well, you got to start somewhere. So you, just like you did everything else, you got to start it. And you just have to see what works and what doesn't work. And so here we are with the Michael Experience podcast. And what I will tell you is that in doing it so far, I've loved the learning piece behind the scenes. I've loved the, producing it differently than I would when I was facing talent. Even some of the things that I spend time on now, because I'm not focused on lighting, I'm not focused on angles, I'm not focused on, the fashions and making sure those look right, and all of those things that come with producing a visual production. um I've been able to focus on other things, like, okay, I see these unique flyers that happen. Okay, what does that look like? All right, there are these editing tools that people use in graphics, because there's still a visual component. It's just not, in action. It's not a live action kind of thing. So I'm like, okay, well, let me figure out how people are doing this. And so it has pushed me to evolve in other ways as well. And sometimes I have a headache, but I've enjoyed the learning process through it. And so when I think about goal setting, I think about what is important to me in terms of opportunity cost. And if you're not familiar with what an opportunity cost is, there's many names for it, but it is just the thing that you have to give up in order to have something else. It's very important to me that I feel free. And I don't just mean time, I just mean it's important for me to feel as free as possible, with less conventions, with less constraints. And for me, being in the audio podcast world allows me to move freely about. I can record in my backyard if I wanted to. I could record in LA if I'm on a trip, to LA. I overseas if I want to. I can literally record anywhere I want to, whenever I want to. I don't have to call the crew in. I don't have to set up, this extraneous, studio or anything like that. I don't have to get an outfit. I literally can pick up my microphone and say, you know what? I am going to record this today. It takes away some of you know, the behind the scenes work that happens when you're doing a visual podcast. Now, will I do one at some point? Possibly. I don't know. It just depends what that looks like. It depends what that team looks like. But I know to be as free as possible is one of the things in my life and in my career that I need to have. And so in looking at what I want to do next, corporate life is a big question mark to me still because I don't know in terms of freedom what that would give me. I've had roles again where I traveled and did the things, and that felt good for a time. But if I'm being honest, I don't want to have to be tied to a cell phone or a daily expectation. I want to be able to wake up and say, this is what matters most to me today. And this is where I can make an impact and be able to do that. Are there some roles out there that there may be a higher level of that? Possibly. But at this stage, I am learning that everything in that realm requires more and more of the strings, so to speak. And although I can do it out of necessity, I would much rather not in my goals. I would much rather be able to, pick and choose. Am I going to be speaking at a university today? Am I going to be teaching a semester, um, you know, in business management or human resources or the philosophy of the working adult or something like that? I would love to devote my time to those things that feel very good to me and that also allow me to tap into a very organic and authentic method of communication, to go into a room and to be able to share what I've done in my career. I could do that 1,000 times over. To go into a room and empower people and inspire people to be to be their best selves. I can do that at the drop of a hat. I have so many people that call me to this day and they're just like, Michael, I just need you to listen, or Michael, I am contemplating this career move, or even just lifestyle advice. Like I've had so many people say, listen, this is where I'm at. How do I do a mind shift? And the beauty in that is when you pray and you ask for guidance, so that you can build your goals and create your direction. The recurring thing that I keep coming back to is this: what I'm doing now, using my voice to build community, using my voice to inform, inspire, to educate, to get people thinking. But even though I know that this is recurring, there is also that thing of, okay, how do I do this on a larger scale? How do I get into those places where I am speaking at colleges or I am being a keynote speaker, just at large and empowering people in that way? It's like, how do you get there? I see it. And for me, I am opening up and expanding the way in which I look at information because it requires me to look in different avenues. There was once upon a time I was just HR focused. There's one point where I was just operations focused. And I think sometimes you can pigeonhole yourself or pinhole yourself into or get into a narrow minded view, and just that's what you look at. So I've said to myself, I have to take this and apply it to this new thing, but also figuring out how my livelihood can be enriched in the same way. And so I know I talked about a lot in this episode, and a lot of this was my free flowing thoughts. But I guess if I could give you something, it is that if you've grown up in survival mode, right? And that has been a part of your fear factor, you have to challenge those things as they come up, as you know them, and constantly remind yourself that everything that you have and everything that you've come to this moment, this spot, this position in your life with is what those people around you wanted. And so, for that reason and that reason alone, you are meant to be there and you are enough, more than enough to be there. And expounding on the fear, whatever that level of fear is, allow your fear to be your fuel. Don't try to walk away from something because it seems scary, whether it's the unknown of it, whether it seems like a mountain of work, whether it is you find yourself going into a space with the industry titans or the successful titans in the space. Those are opportunities for you to continue to nurture and grow, yourself in that career set, in that skill set. So don't let that fear stop you. Let it be your fuel to keep you going. And then also getting real with yourself about how you've looked at your goals so far in life, and the pigeonholes, or I guess the recurring um positions that you find yourself in that maybe you didn't want to be in, such as me being in the spotlight, me being out in front. Like, challenging, is that really a part of who I am and what I want to do going forward? And if I am going to do it differently, that's going to be a complete shift. And if I'm going to continue this in some form, just what does that look like moving forward? Maybe I do still, be front and center, and maybe it's a when and if, when this arises, okay, or if this situation calls for, as opposed to just accepting it blindly. But I think understanding where you started, understanding the moments in the moment, and then defining what that north or guiding star is a crucial step in how you form your goals later on, if you find yourself having difficulty like I did. Now, goals, right, can be anything from just a position, an action, a simple action, moving, doing more of it. Goals can be a myriad of things. We all, hopefully, we all understand that. But what I will say is personal goals are just as important as professional goals, and absolutely just as, if not more important than, those survival, goals. And those are those things that frighten you to go back to, or frighten you to never achieve, or frighten you in some way, that make you freeze in where you are. But I want to make sure that I share that and pay it forward, and let people know it is not always an easy journey. And your goal setting process does and should change and evolve as you do. And it's very important to take these moments wherever we can, however we can, to assess if we are really being our most authentic self, and are we really pouring into the things that we really want. And so, aside from home ownership, and aside from the car, aside from the shopping and those things that come along in your lifestyle, right? Those are secondary to the things that are most meaningful to your person and the characteristics that make you who you are. And I think we do get focused on those other things because those things tell us that we've made it. Those things give us status. Those things tell us we made it in some way, shape, or form. But I will contend that none of that really means anything if, when you sit in your car, you don't feel good about who you are, and you don't feel fulfilled in the work that you've done or in the work that you're doing, and you start to feel like you are just performing every day. Because what I think I also understand about imposter syndrome is that even though you've come out of that struggle, that survival situation, that maybe I'm not good enough situation, and you do a bunch of things along the way that are not really characteristic of who you are and who you want to become, at the end of the day, you've accumulated all these things and you still feel like there's a stranger in your house. And if I can just impart and affect that notion on everybody so that it doesn't happen, or it happens less frequently, then I will say that this is worth it. But there's no worse feeling than to do all of these things and to perform every day and to sit in that house you built and feel like it's somebody else's home, or to sit in that car, or to sit up under those clothes and feel like this still feels like somebody else's life. And I'm just showing up every day and going through the motions. And I say that from experience because I believe that is why goal setting at this point feels hard and feels tough, because I went into it just trying to survive, trying to prove to myself that I could do all of these things that no one else probably thought I could do, or maybe a few people thought I could do. And myself, I didn't know for sure. And I've accumulated all the things that people say you should accumulate to be successful. And then to look around and say, but where am I truly in the situation? Where do I really fit in here? Because I still don't know that these things are me. And so at this point in my life, I am like, what are my goals? My personal, one of my biggest personal goals is to be free in every way that I can be: mentally free, physically free, emotionally free, authentically myself. There's a freedom in being able to just show up as who you are. I look at Tabitha Brown as a possibility model for just that freedom, that the authenticity freedom. She's a wonderful possibility model of what it looks like when you wake up every day and you radiate outwardly who you are, the way that you want to be. I want to be free in that way. I want to wake up and allow my passions to pursue, the things that contribute to my livelihood. That saying that I don't chase, I attract. I believe that is when I look at Tabitha, I really think about that. I don't chase, I attract possibility model as well, because being authentic has led her to so many wonderful things, and I love it. You can see it, you can feel it, and it's a possibility model for me. So when I say freedom, I want the level of freedom to go out into the world, be exactly who I am, show up as exactly who I am, and not feel like it's a performance. And that is one of the if not the biggest key in what does my goal setting look like, and how and what does that look like moving forward? How can I do more of that? So, personally, get in touch with who you are, what really matters, and just really think about the level at which you're operating just from your organic space without having to perform, without having to be on because it's a requirement and not just, a part of your innate characteristics. Really challenge yourself to think about that and know that if your goal is just something simple as, I want to take a back seat, be okay with jumping in that backseat headspace and knowing it's going to be uncomfortable for a while because you're used to having two hands on the wheel and eyes on the road. And now you have the opportunity to look around and see all of the scenery and experience what it's like not to have, to strain and to do all the things that comes with navigating, that space. You get to be in that supportive and in that backseat behind the scenes role. Be okay with looking into that and it feeling uncomfortable. And then allow yourself to just express in the moment, acknowledge in the moment when something feels great and when something doesn't, and say, this isn't for me. Because sometimes you do have to say no, even when opportunities seem like great opportunities. And it's something that you might be used to, and you're like, I could do it. Being able to say no in this moment so that you can get to the yes in those other moments that are going to make you feel most authentic when you're sitting in that car and sitting in that house. So for me, my personal goal is freedom. And when I look at my professional goals, it is to enlist everything that I have into avenues where I can showcase that. So I want to do a TED Talk. I want to do a TED Talk about my trajectory in growing up in underprivileged, underserved circumstances and making it to, senior director level leadership. I want to talk about all of the things that I've seen that are adjacent to that in other people's journeys and how I've helped other people get through those things. I want to talk about all of the things in life that for some reason we don't want to say out loud. There's a saying, I say the quiet part out loud. I think there's so much power in saying that because there are so many people who feel the exact same way. And in a space where community building is so important and connectivity and realism is so important, I think those things do have to be said out loud to help build in that space. So I want to do more of that. I want to foster community and unity through that kind of expression. And all of that in some way is going to provide for the life I want to live. I haven't 100% figured that out, but one of my goals is to figure it out and to figure it out quickly. So I hope that in some way this conversation has helped you understand maybe a rut that you're in with your goal setting and maybe a side of goal setting that you didn't really think about, something that is different from when you Google and it tells you a 5-step process. Hopefully, this takes you through some of that inner turmoil and that inner workings that I've had to deal with. And I hope that it helps inform and inspire and motivate you to look at your goal setting process, revisit it, and revamp it in some way. So, this has been the Michael Experience. Thank you all for the time and for joining. And make sure you go out there and love on yourself before you can love on somebody else. And I'll see y'all on the next one. Peace and love, y'all. Bye.